Good afternoon. My name is Tim Feeney, and this is Doc's Desk 3 podcast. And today is July 16th, 2026. On my first podcast, I introduced myself as to who, how, what, and why. So if you need that information, I refer you to that. One of the criticisms or pieces of advice I got from the first podcast was to make it a little bit shorter. Last time it was an hour and 4 minutes. So we generally have two segments here. One is a news segment, and then the other segment is what we call a hot topic. And so we can get on with the news segment. And as I mentioned before, the OBGYN residents that I used to teach just really didn't have a whole lot of time to really stay current with daily news affairs. And so today I was going to discuss the Supreme Court, which June 30th handed out 8 decisions. We're not going to go over all 8. That would take too long. The Supreme Court generally runs a term from September 1st of the previous year, so in this case September 1st of 2025 to June 30th of 2026 is sort of their term. They do work more than that, and they can make decisions beyond June 30th, but that's typically what they call the end of their term. I have listed here some of the issues that they've decided upon, and one is birthright citizenship. Another is transgender athlete, the transgender athlete issue, and then finally gerrymandering. I don't think we're going to get to all 3, but let me begin. First of all, for me, the Supreme Court is a difficult issue to discuss. For many reasons. One, I may be wrong here, but I think that a lot of people think that the Supreme Court makes laws, but it does not make laws. And what makes me feel this way is as I see people yelling, marching, and carrying on in Washington, D.C. outside the Supreme Court, it seems to me that is their rant, if you will, that the Supreme Court makes laws and they don't like what's happening. But as Ben Sasse, S-A-S-S-E, points out, Ben is a retired United States Senator from the state of Nebraska. I believe he's in his early 50s, and he is presently fighting like crazy with pancreatic cancer and experimental drugs, if you will. But anyway, he continues to write, and in one of his most recent editions, he said, quote, "The Supreme Court is not a political arena in America's constitutional system. Judges don't make laws, they apply them." He goes on in the same article, "The Supreme Court wasn't designed to reflect the will of a majority or embrace the popular opinions of the day. That's supposed to be the legislature's job." And as I read through that, it sort of reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, and that is, the popular opinion is not always the right opinion. Another reason, for me anyway, making the Supreme Court a difficult subject to discuss is the extent of their purview. And I give you an example here. Recently in Ohio, legislative efforts regarding parental consent in the smartphone age. And this issue involved 3 different court systems: a federal appeals court, a district court, and the 6th district court. And then 4 courts if you include the Supreme Court. And these courts don't always agree, and that's basically how it gets up to the Supreme Court. Anyway, ultimately the Supreme Court will have to decide, settle, the many questions that are now being raised about how governments may regulate internet use by minors, consistent with the First Amendment. So, the Supreme Court was established in 1789 via the Second Continental Congress by the Judiciary Act. It was initially composed of a Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices for a total of 6. It got up to 10 because of the need for the justices back in that time to have to travel far to different districts, if you will, to help settle disputes. But in 1869, the number was settled at 9, and it's been that way ever since. The birthright issue came to the front when President Trump, in January of 2025, one of the first things he did after he was inaugurated, issued an executive order which maintained birthright citizenship for the children of green card holders while excluding those whose parents are in the United States illegally or are on non-resident visas. So he thought that the green card holders and their children, that was fine for citizenship. He was excluding those who were here illegally and having children. Those children would not be citizens per his executive order, nor those children of non-resident visa people. On June 30th, just not too long ago of this year, the Supreme Court ruling decided to reject the executive order, declaring that children born to people in the United States illegally or temporarily are not American citizens. They rejected his contention, his executive law. So instead, by a 5-4 decision, the court said, children born in the United States to parents unlawfully or temporarily present are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment clause. So they rejected Trump's executive order, and they came back and said that these children are indeed citizens. I did want to share the 14th Amendment, which was written in 1868, and it is here in page 262. This, however, is Amy Coney Barrett's book, Listening to the Law. She is a recent appointee to the Supreme Court, and as I said, I have a hard time dealing with the Supreme Court and its difficulties relative to all that they do and the mountains they have to climb to make a decision, etc., etc. This is a pretty nice personal account of how she approaches the her position in the Supreme Court. But anyway, 14th Amendment, passed in 1868. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privilege or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Sounds pretty straightforward, but it's complicated, especially with the jurisdiction issue. That was the 14th Amendment. Now, interestingly, the 14th Amendment obviously followed the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, and that is basically the amendment to our Constitution which ended slavery. And then 3 years later, they passed the 14th Amendment, which was commonly felt at the time to resolve the problem of the children of slaves and making them citizens of the United States. With the majority decision, Chief Justice Roberts made the following statement: citizenship, then and now, was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every free-born person in this land. We keep that promise today, he said. The decision was 5-4, so there's obviously dissenters. And Justice Gorsuch, in his dissent, noted, quote, "We are a nation committed to a view of citizenship, open to all children born here to parents who can call this country their home." End of quote. Those four, the dissenters, if you read much about the Supreme Court, they have the books about these decisions for dissenters, and it's amazing. A couple of things are amazing. Number one, how often the vote is 9-0, and then the dissenting views versus the four. If you read much about that, you'll be as confused as I am sometimes. But anyway, for me, relative to birthright citizenship, and I have delivered a number of people who I felt were here mainly to have a child who would subsequently have citizenship here in the United States of America. Not a lot, but for me, birthright citizenship is mostly a result of people wanting to live in a country where there is freedom and opportunity for an individual to live a better life. And they want that for themselves and their children. And I didn't know this until recently, but a mother could be in violation of a United States immigration law if a consular officer suspects that a mother is traveling to the United States for the primary purpose of giving birth in the United States to obtain U.S. citizenship for their child. Be pretty hard to enforce, be pretty hard to detect, but anyway, it's there. Which really goes to my point, which is maybe if we had an immigration policy fair and enforced, we wouldn't even be having this debate today. Next, let's talk about another proclamation they made on June 30th concerning transgender bans. On June 30th of this year, the Supreme Court ruled that states can exclude transgender athletes from women's and girls' sports teams. as I was learning about this decree, I came across this. And this is a SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States blog. And in this 6-page publication, they talk about what the court said in relationship to this. And I mention this because you can go to the computer and get on Supreme Court of the United States blog, SCOTUS, and pull up any of these decisions that have been made and get a nice presentation about how they came to their conclusion and about dissenters. So in this case, the transgender ban issue, the justice writing for the majority said, men and women have inherent physical differences that are relative to athletic performance. For example, height, weight, strength, speed, endurance, and jumping ability. As a result of these differences, forcing female athletes to compete against males can create significant safety risks in contact sports. Moreover, the justice added, in virtually all competitive sports, forcing female athletes to compete against males can undermine competitive fairness. As a result, schools, therefore, typically maintain separate women and men's sports teams. This brings to mind for me in the last Olympics in women's boxing. A transgender female was boxing against a highly touted female contestant, and she knew her dilemma, and the bell rang, and the transgender woman hit her opponent in the face. She dropped to her knees and she was crying, and she forfeited that match right then and there, stating she had never, ever been hit so hard in her life. I really felt sorry for her. It was really a sad moment. Also, with the majority, a justice said, men and boys with gender dysphoria are not women or girls, even if they believe they are. Sex is an immutable biologic characteristic. It is binary, and man and woman, boy and girl are the terms that correspond to adults and children of each sex. To use language to obscure reality, to show indifference regarding the truth, is to lie to the public and cease to treat our fellow citizens as equals. Now, I know that there's a lot of people going to go, man, that's just not right, because they have this other opinion. I have family members that transgender. I had one patient in particular that I remember that transgendered from female to male. And I think these people are extraordinary in their mission, in their journey. They're wonderful people to talk to. But athletics is different, and they are different, either side. And we, as an athletic system, if you will, I was going to say a country, but just our athletic systems, if we make a rule to tender to such a minority and with such dissent, I'm not sure that's what we should be doing. Doesn't mean I don't feel sorry for them. I love them. I think they are wonderful people, but I think we have to consider the big picture, the whole picture, if you will. I find it interesting that the Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, this was earlier in the court's decision making, but by a 6-3 vote, upheld a Tennessee law banning the use of puberty blockers and hormone therapy by transgender teenagers. And it's the same dissenters in this decision as there are in the transgender ban decision. And all I can say about that is that they're consistent anyway, but I don't think they really see the big picture and how difficult it would be to implement rules in every county, if you will, in every city in the United States of America to accommodate the transgender athlete. It's just not possible, and it's not practical at all. Okay. I highly recommend that. I really enjoyed it. She's got some great personal stories about her life and her family's life, and great insight into how the court works, and it was very educational. Now, turning to the segment of the podcast called Hot Topics. Here we are, July 2026, and we are celebrating our 250th birthday. That's a wonderful thing. I think we are a great country, and I think the fact that we have the oldest and the longest living constitution in effect in the world today may be reason enough to make the United States the greatest country. But there are so many other things. Those who think we are not the greatest country don't know history very well. And or they only dwell on the present, which is what they know. Don't know history very well. They confuse greatness with other traits. And they fail to appreciate that no one and no country is perfect. We the people. Those words started our journey towards freedom. We refuse to be ruled by a monarchy. And on our journey, we have helped others attain their goal for freedom as well. Many countries are grateful to the American soldier for the role they played in helping them achieve their freedom. One could make a list of the United States of America, accomplishments which make us great. These have been talked about over the last several months as we've come to celebrate the 250th birthday. But the computer, the car, air travel, the telephone, and on and on and on. For over 200 years, we have led the way in making life what it is versus yesteryear. It's great. Maybe that greatness is a result of our treasuring freedom the way we do. In my lifetime, the polio vaccine, it was incredible. Dr. Jonas Salk in 1955. I got a vaccination in 1955. I'll guarantee you I had polio. It's one of the lucky ones. But polio struck fear in families. Its elimination was a godsend. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but I've got here a picture of 3 kids in iron lungs. And that's what happened to kids who really got polio, and they were affected significantly by it. Not everybody was, but those that were ended up in iron lungs. Try and get that again. But anyway, I just read that the last person surviving with an iron lung was a woman who died at like 103 years of age recently. Pretty cool. But anyway, its elimination was a godsend. Another in my lifetime, childhood leukemia. I was at Riley Children's Hospital here in Indianapolis on a rotation, ward medicine, oncology, and we had a lot of young kids in there with leukemia. And at that time, we had pretty heavy-duty chemotherapeutic agents that they were the state of the art at the time. But before the 70s, fewer than 10% survived. And I'll never forget going up to the ward in the morning one time, walking into a room where I expected to see this 4-year-old girl who was just as cute as a button, and her bed was made, and she was gone. Today, 90% of the victims of childhood leukemia survive. Medical research is the hero here. Time is short, so I want to make a point here. Who do we owe our debt to here, living in the greatest country on earth? Who do we owe? The Founding Fathers? Certainly their accomplishments and personal sacrifices were great. And they did all that against some pretty difficult odds. I'm always amazed when I read about those times, Revolutionary War, etc. I just don't think anything like that had ever been done before. Sure, there had been wars, but were those wars for freedom? Who do we owe? Scientists. Polio, leukemia. Certainly significant contributors to our good fortune here in this country today. Who do we owe? I'm going to say the aforementioned American soldier. our entire military establishment over the last 250 years. Why? Well, when you read about the founding fathers or the scientists, it's all pretty exciting. But when you read about soldiers and what they did, it can be awful. As I said in episode 1, time and distance oftentimes allows facts, in this case, the atrocities and carnage of war, to fade away. Time and distance, time just because of the element of years gone by. Distance is how many young people today even know somebody who fought in a war, much less died in a war. That's what I mean by the distance. There's just a lot of distance between how some people feel today about the United States and the history of the United States. John Adams, one of the founding fathers. You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. This book is not for everybody. It's called Tears in the Darkness. A friend of mine gave it to me. And it's a story of the Bataan Death March. Well, the Bataan Death March occurred during World War II, and Americans were captured by the Japanese, and they were forced to march 60 miles in horrible conditions, and they were starving, and some were getting killed on the way. But I want to relate a funny story, I think, a good story, about a guy named Mario Tonelli, Tonelli. He was a Notre Dame fullback. This story is in the Sports Illustrated, January 27, 2003. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the story about how I heard it. Tonelli was a halfback at Notre Dame, and this is like in 37, 38, 39, well, before the war started. But here he was in 41, gets drafted, and he's in the Pacific Theater. And the next thing you know, he's on the Bataan Death March. This book, Tears in the Darkness, describes the horribleness of war and what our American soldiers went through fighting for freedom. Tonelli was walking along the Bataan Death March, and a Japanese soldier came up to him and asked him about the ring that he was carrying, or had on his ring. I don't know how he got it on his finger, or kept it on his finger, because he was a 225, 250 pound fullback, and he was down to 150 pounds on the Bataan Death March. Nevertheless, he had a ring, and that Japanese soldier wanted it. And Tonelli very brightly gave the guy his Notre Dame ring, which has his name on it. The next day, a Japanese soldier came back in line on horseback to where Tonelli was. And that Japanese soldier asked Tonelli in perfect English, "Is this yours?" And he said, "Yes." And the Japanese soldier flipped him his ring back. And he said, "That was a hell of a run you made." Tonelli airplane against Southern Cal, made an 80-yard run that set up a touchdown that he ultimately scored to beat Southern Cal. And that Japanese soldier was a student in the United States of America at Southern Cal, and he saw the run. They were college classmates, if you will. Anyway, the whole story's here. A little different. I embellish it a little bit, but it's pretty good. Tonelli survived. I believe lived in Chicago, and pretty amazing story. Certainly, those who made the ultimate sacrifice deserve our attention. They deserve our forever appreciation and gratitude. People need to make an effort to know, however, what they need to appreciate and what they need to be grateful for. In the magnificent poem, In Flanders Fields, by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. This was written May 13th, 1915. And the poem that he wrote deals with the hopes of the deceased soldiers. Those hopes are explored in that poem. McCrae, a Canadian soldier, physician, and poet during World War I in Belgium, was inspired after the funeral of a close friend. His friend was Lieutenant Alex Helmer, who perished in the Second Battle of Ypres in Belgium, World War I. By the way, at that time, May of 1915, it was the first time chemical weapons, chlorine gas, were used in combat by the Germans. Those were horrible deaths, immense suffering, worthy of our gratitude. While Ypres was a battle of the Allied forces, United States included, against Germany, I believe the sentiment in McCrae's poem applies to any soldier anywhere who is or has fought for freedom for people. And now, the poem. I got no chance here. I'm a real emotional type guy. But here we go. In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies grow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived. We felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Way to go, Tim. Teams, countries are great because of participation. We owe those participants who gave it all. Let us carry the torch, hold it high, and not break with faith, the faith with those who die. And that's it for my hot topic in Flanders Fields. Poppies. When I was a kid, on Veterans Day, we oftentimes were given a little poppy. It was paper mache type thing. Wasn't it that big, but we could pin it on our shirt. And it was in honor of Veterans Day. And so I thought I'd try and make something to coordinate with the poem that I just read. And so we have in Flanders Fields these poppies. And then the word of the day, if you will, P-O-S-E-U-R-S. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'll make sure you can. Pocheurs, P-O-S-E-U-R-S, pocheurs. It's a French word, I guess, you know. I don't know what the hell that meant, and I've told people that I read articles all the time, and these journalists, as I said, I think they have a bucket full of words that they use to make the day interesting. But pocheur. And I'm going to read the sentence and how it's used. In the compendious United States Congress, voters always have been ready to fill some of its 535 seats with gadflies and pocheurs, whom in a million years they would never trust to lead the country. I thought it was pocheurs, but then I found out it's really posers, and that sort of helps one understand the meaning when it's pronounced correctly, posers. For indeed, it's a derogatory term for someone who pretends to be something they are not. Voters have always been ready to fill some of its 535 seats with gadflies and posers. Which takes me back to Winston Churchill, who made a statement about democracy and understanding how it could work. It just can't work. And he would say, have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter, and you'll understand there's no way it could work. There's one other thing, however, I wanted to read, I believe. And I was talking about in Flanders Fields and the soldiers that died and the people that survived war and again, distance. We don't have many that have survived war. But in 1939, 45, when the Japanese surrendered and World War II was basically over, Winston Churchill who was a great leader and helped Londoners survive the tremendous bombing by the Germans. But when 1945 occurred and the war was over, ordinary people could get on with their lives without the extraordinary fears they carried around for the previous 6 years, since 1939, being bombed, drafted, captured, or dying in some far-off malaria-infested hellhole. I'm glad people don't have to have those feelings today, but I think they have to understand that to maintain the freedom that we have, we really should understand what people went through to attain it for us. Till next time.